Good Governance, Chapter 4. In Good Governance, Chapter 4, we're going to be tackling the legal, regulatory, and political issues. Now, the purpose and the perspective of this chapter will explore the complex relationships between business and government. First, we discuss some of the laws and structure, the environment for regulation of business. Now, major legislation relating to competition and regulatory agencies is reviewed to provide an overview of the regulatory environment. Now, next, we will consider how business can participate in the public policy uh, process through lobbying, political contributions, and political action committees. Now, finally, we will offer a framework for a strategic approach to managing the legal and regulatory environment. Now, we discussed first the government's influence on business, the rationale for regulation. So many of the issues used to rationalize business regulation can be categorized as economic or social. Now, when you say economic and competitive reasons for regulation, so what are these? Now, a great number of regulations have been passed over the last century in an effort to level the playing field in which businesses operate. Okay? Uh, Now, what are needed? Now, the factors that are needed. Trust. Trust are organizations generally established to gain control of a product or market or industry by eliminating competition. So that is the trust. If successful, a monopoly can result. Now, what is a monopoly? Now, a monopoly occurs when just one business provides a good or service in a given market. That's monopoly. Now, because trust and monopolies lack serious competition, there are concerns that they may either exploit their market dominance to restrict their output and raise prices or lower quality in order to gain profits or greater profits rather. Now, society desires to restrict destructive or unfair competition, such as conspiring to fix prices, stealing trade secrets, trademarks, and copyright infringement, false advertising, and deceptive selling methods. So these are the dangers. Now, these economically based regulations allow the government to punish firms that engage in anti-competitive practices. So beware. Now, what are the social reasons for regulation? Now, regulation may occur when marketing activities result in undesirable consequences for society. A regulation is necessary in manufacturing industries to ensure that all firms within an industry do their part to minimize the cost of contamination caused by pollution and to pay their fair share of this cost. Regulations have come about in response to social demands for equality in the workplace. Regulations have resulted from special interest group crusades for safer products. Um, Issues arising from the increasing use of the internet have led to demands even for new laws protecting consumers and businesses. Okay? Now, when you say laws and regulation, now the federal government, in our case is is our government, have passed many laws to regulate the business conduct. So for now we'll be using the American as our reference because you're using a foreign or a Western referencing, book referencing. So the federal government has passed many laws to regulate the business conduct. No? So related to our Philippine government constitution even and the laws that reveals our land. So right now, Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act passed in 1890 is the principal tool employed by the federal government to prevent businesses from restraining trade and monopolizing markets. So in our case, it happened in PLDT. Now Meralco, I don't know, a lot of praise is coming in. The oil industry, gas and oil are now actually, you know, proliferating in terms of participants in the trade. Okay, so there. But in the U.S., it's Sherman Antitrust Act. Now, Clayton Antitrust Act is another one. Clayton. The Congress enacted the Clayton Antitrust Act in 1914 to limit mergers and acquisitions that have the potential to stifle competition. Next is the Federal Trade Commission Act. Now, what is this? Enacted the Federal Trade Commission Act in 1914 to further strengthen the antitrust provision of the Sherman Act and to create the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to protect consumers and businesses from their unfair competition. Now, the FTC, or the Fair Trade Commission, has the greatest influence on business activities of all federal regulatory agencies. And then the FTC has the power to issue cease and desist orders that requires company to air corrective advertising, resolve disputes, and seek monetary penalties. The proposed financial reforms. In response to 2008 to 2009 financial crisis, administrative leaders have proposed sweeping reforms to increase consumer protection. Now, enforcement of the laws. These laws are enforced by state and federal authorities and through lawsuits by private citizens, competitors, and special interest groups included. Okay? So that is the laws and regulation on the federal level. Now we go global regulation. No? If you're going to be global, international, a company that engages in commerce beyond its own country is now considered global regularization. Beyond the country's borders, must contend with the potentially complex relationship among the laws of its own nation. Now, international laws and the laws of the nation in which it will be trading, as well as various trade restrictions imposed on international trade. So, adhering to those laws and regulation. Although there is a considerable variation and focus among different nations, laws in many countries have antitrust laws that are required similar to those in the United States. For example, the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA eliminates virtually all tariffs on all goods produced and traded among the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So those three very strong countries, US, Canada, and Mexico, makes it easier for the businesses of each country to make investment in other countries. Okay? Now, there's a counterpart, the European Union. We call it EU. Now, it was established in 1958 and to promote the free trade among its members. Now, as of, I think it's about 20 plus countries. So there, no? So I think about 24, 28 countries, no, European nations. Now, the costs and benefits of regulations. So what are the costs and benefits? Now, the costs of regulations. Regulation has numerous costs for businesses, consumers, and society at large. It is difficult to find an accurate measuring tool of this cost. Now, the cost of administrative spending of federal regulatory agencies, the cost of agency staffing, and the cost incurred by businesses in complying with the regulations have all been used to measure the cost of regulation. So these are the references. Now, what are the benefits of regulation? Okay, despite business complaints about the cost of regulation, it provides many benefits over to businesses and consumers and the society as a whole. Now, regulatory reform. Many businesses and individuals believe that the cost of regulation outweigh its benefits and desire deregulation or removal of all the regulatory authority. So they are contradictory also. Now, self-regulation is also needed, no, and be conscious about it. Many companies attempt to regulate themselves in an effort to demonstrate social responsibility and to preclude further regulation by federal or state government, in addition to complying with all the relevant laws and regulations. Many firms choose to join trade associations that have self-regulatory programs. A well-known self-regulatory association is the Better Business Bureau, BBB they call it, a local organization supported by the local member businesses. Although self-regulatory programs are usually less costly than government programs and are able to reduce the need to expand the government bureaucracy, these programs are limited by their lack of authority over non-members and lack of tools to enforce their guidelines. Now, we go to the businesses, business influence on government and politics. So how strong they are, or are they, no? The contemporary political environment considered. Now, many factors have helped to shape the political environment over the past 40 plus years. Now, changes in Congress during these years include eroding influence of the political environment. Now, the committee process was open to public scrutiny, and the power of senior members and committee leaders was reduced. Now, other changes ultimately had the effect of reducing the importance of political parties by decreasing members' dependence on their parties. Okay? Now, the rise of the special interest groups. Now, the success of the activist effort in the 60s and the 1970s spawned the rise of special interest group, which began to focus on getting candidates elected who could further the group's own political agendas. Now, the corporate approaches to influencing government. How do they go over it? Number one is lobbying. What is lobbying? Lobbying is the process of working to persuade public and or government officials to favor a particular position in decision making. Now, many companies concerned about the threat of legislation or regulation that may negatively affect their operation employ lobbyists to communicate their concern to officials on their behalf. Not directly them, but they employ lobbyists. Now, companies may attempt to influence the legislative or regulatory processes more indirectly through trade associations and umbrella organizations that represent collective business interests of many firms. Now, we go to the political action committees. Political action committees, which PACs, are organizations that solicit donations from individuals and then contribute these funds to candidates running for political office. Campaign contribution. So what is a campaign contribution? It's a corporate campaign contribution exists, although federal laws restrict direct corporate contributions to candidates' electoral campaigns. However, donations from businesses and other organizations are frequently made to political parties rather. Okay. Now we go to the government's approach for legal and ethical compliance. Although legal and regulatory forces have a strong influence on business operations, businesses can affect these forces through the political process. And then the most effective way for businesses to manage the legal and regulatory environment is to establish values and policies that communicate the reward appropriate conduct. Okay? Now, the Federal Sentencing Guidelines for Organization, okay, is the FSGO, were established by the United States Sentencing Commission in 1991. not only to streamline the sentencing and punishment for organizational crimes, but also to hold companies as well as their employees responsible for misconduct. Now, companies have also legal incentives for establishing compliance programs. If a court determines that a company's organizational culture rewarded or otherwise created opportunities that encouraged wrongdoing, the firm may be subject to stiff penalties in the event that one of its employees breaks the law. Now, the underlying assumption, uh, or rather, the underlying assumption that is that good corporate citizens maintain compliance systems and internal government controls that deter misconduct by their employees. The United States Sentencing Commission has delineated 7 steps that companies must implement to demonstrate the existence of an effective compliance effort and thereby avoid penalties in the event of an employee wrongdoing. How? Establishing codes of conduct. This is to identify key risk areas. And then next is appoint or hire a high-level compliance manager that falls under ethics officer. And then take care in delegating authority through background checks on employees. Okay, institute a training program in communication system, the ethics systems or training. Monitor and audit for misconduct, reporting mechanism. Enforce and discipline, management implementation of policy. And then revise program as needed. So that is a feedback and action. Okay? Now, a strong compliance act as a buffer to keep employees from committing crimes and to protect a company's reputation should wrongdoing occur despite its best efforts. Okay? Now, last to discuss is the Sarbanes-Oakley Act. The Sarbanes-Oakley Act, SOX, was passed to restore stakeholders' confidence and provide a new standard of ethical behavior for business, especially for top management and board of directors responsible for company oversight. Now, the section of the SOX that has caused the most concern for companies has been compliance with Section 404, which requires that managers create reliable internal financial controls, that management attests to the reliability of those controls and the accuracy of the financial statements that result from those controls, an independent auditor to further attest to the statements made by management. Now, the implementation of SOX can take a great deal of organizational time and resources. However, there are a number of benefits, including increased investor confidence, or greater accountability, or greater protection of employee retirement plans, and the clarity on the executive compensation and corporate strategy. Okay? So that is chapter 4 of the good governance. Thank you very much.